Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're the show that, digs into complex source material so you can get the essential knowledge fast. Today, our focus, it's literary critique, and specifically this huge imbalance you see in the conversation.
Right.
Why everyone talks about men writing women, or MWW is like this global shorthand for bad writing.
Yeah, everyone knows that term.
But the flip side, women writing men, it barely makes a ripple.
Exactly. And that's our mission for this deep dive, really. We're going to look at everything from internet forums, the dedicated ones,
right,
to classic feminist theory, even sociological studies, just to figure out why this asymmetry.
Especially when, as our sources suggest, the actual problems with the writing, they can be identical.
They often are, structurally speaking. So yeah, the question isn't really if bad women writing men exists. It does. It's why the other critique, MWW, just completely dominates the conversation. Why it has so much more cultural weight.
Okay, so to kick things off, we need to properly define that dominant term. We're talking men writing women, MWW. And it's not just, a male author writing a female character. Yeah. That's not it.
No, it's become this specific internet slang term, hasn't it?
Yeah, really cemented by a whole online community just dedicated to mocking terrible examples, truly awful writing of the female experience.
And that origin, that online space, it's actually pretty key because it let people share examples that were maybe too ridiculous, too absurd for serious academic talk.
Right, but they instantly show you the problem.
Exactly. Illuminates it immediately.
Okay, so let's unpack the core idea here. This whole MWW thing, it's really tied to one specific piece of satire, or maybe just a quote that went viral.
Oh, yeah. The meme.
Yeah. If you've been anywhere near online book circles, you know the one. It goes back to became the sort of legendary inspiration for that whole subreddit.
It really is the gold standard for showing character objectification in the most direct way possible. I'm talking about that infamous line. I mean, it still makes writers cringe, right?
It does. She breasted boobily to the stare.
And titted downwards.
She breasted boobily. I mean, okay, it's hilarious, yes, but it serves a real purpose.
Absolutely.
It flags the problem instantly. This external, sexualized, often just fundamentally confused focus on the female body.
And the biological inaccuracy, too. Like, the author is viewing the character as just parts, not a whole person.
Yeah, not a person, just a collection of described bits.
And this critique, it quickly went beyond just jokes about anatomy. It has a real theoretical grounding in decades of critical work, specifically the concept of the male gaze.
Okay, the male gaze. Tell us more about that framework. What exactly is it, and why is it so crucial for understanding the MWW complaint?
Right. So the term itself, it was coined by the film theorist Laura Mulvey. This was back in her big 1975 feminist essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema.
Ah, so film theory originally.
Exactly. Originally, it was about how in movies, the camera's perspective, and therefore the audience's view, tends to default to a male heterosexual perspective.
Okay, so it's about whose viewpoint is being centered, whose pleasure really is being prioritized by the way things are shown.
Precisely. Mulvey's own definition is still the benchmark, I think, she said. In a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure in looking has been split between active male and passive female.
Active male, passive female.
Yeah. And then the determining male gaze projects its fantasy onto the female figure, which is styled accordingly.
Styled accordingly. Wow. Okay, so if we take that idea and apply it to writing, MWW isn't just an author saying, oh, this character is attractive. It's about her lacking, an inner life.
That's the core of it, yeah. She exists to be looked at.
Just to be viewed.
That's the problem in writing, as it applies here. In modern usage, MWW points to times when the female character, she lacks agency. She doesn't have her own meaningful goals. Or maybe her traits just exist to, help the male character's story along.
So she becomes passive.
An object.
Right, an object for male sexual gratification sometimes. Or maybe like a trope, a prize to be won by the hero.
Or just a shallow caricature, ultimately.
Yeah, exactly. A caricature.
Okay, so if we move past just the sexualization part, which is, what the breasted boobily meme really hits on.
Right.
What are the other specific, maybe more damaging ways that poor MWW shows up? What did the source?
Well, we can sort of break it down into maybe 4 common failure points. First, the obvious, that excessive, often biologically weird focus on the body.
Okay.
Second, reducing her whole personality to just, 2 things. Usually feisty and pretty. You see that a lot.
The feisty heroine.
Right. Third, female characters who just constantly fail the Bechdel test. They only exist to talk about men or react to men. Right? They have no independent conversations or concerns.
But the fourth one, this is the one that I think really demands attention because it gets to the core lack of respect for, the female experience itself. It's the way some male authors handle sexual violence in their...
And you used the word insidious earlier when describing this. Why that specific word? What makes the portrayal insidious?
It's about the function of the trauma within the story. It feels insidious when, for example, it's written in a way that seems to, glorify the voyeurism of the assault itself. Or maybe worse, when the narrative kind of excuses the attacker or downplays what they did. But the critique our sources brought up most often was actually the frivolous.
Frivolous. How so? Using it just as a plot point.
Exactly. Using it as just a plot point. Think about the kind of trauma male characters often get in, say, high-stakes fantasy or sci-fi.
Okay, like battle wounds, losing status, the burden of command.
Right. Physical injury, career disaster, emotional breakdown from responsibility, losing their stand. These are all complex things, right? They lead to nuanced character growth.
Yeah.
But for too many female characters in these MWW examples, the sources argued the harm they suffer is almost exclusively sexual trauma.
I see. So it defines them only by that victimization.
Yes. It robs them of that whole spectrum of other non-sexual challenges that male characters get to face and grow from. It basically defines them only by what men can do to them or take from them.
That distinction really hits home. The idea that sexual trauma becomes the only path to depth for a female character, while male characters get this whole range, that's powerful.
It is.
However, as this whole MWW conversation's gotten bigger and louder, there's also this risk, isn't there, of being a bit trigger happy.
Definitely. That's a crucial point for having a good faith discussion.
You can't just label every description of a woman's body or appearance as automatically being the male gaze, right?
No, absolutely not. And it's easy to fall into that trap, honestly. Once you've seen enough genuinely bad examples, you start to get wary, maybe overly critical of any mention of appearance.
Understandable, but not quite fair analysis.
Right. Literary analysis needs nuance, especially when you're trying to sort out what's, realistic characterization versus actual objectification.
So let's talk about realistic. If an author writes a character who is genuinely crude or shallow, maybe a straight male character, and that character makes a comment about a woman's body that reflects his crudeness, that's just true to life, isn't it? That's character work.
It absolutely is. Or, straight female characters comment on their own appearance or other women's appearances. That happens.
So what's the key? How do we, as readers or critics, tell the difference between the author objectifying versus the character objectifying?
It really all hinges on the point of view, the POV. The author has to be clear about whose head we're inside at that moment.
Right. Whose perspective is filtering this description?
Exactly. A description that sounds frankly gross coming from a deeply sexist character doesn't automatically mean the author is promoting MWW. It could just mean the author is doing a really good job of writing a convincingly sexist character.
So separating the author's voice from the character's voice.
It's everything.
Okay, maybe a concrete example would help here.
Yeah.
Especially from one of the genres where this comes up a lot. SFFF, right? Speculative fiction, sci-fi, fantasy.
Yeah, SFFF gets talked about constantly in this context. A good example people often bring up to show nuance is Joe Abercrombie's First Lost.
Abercrombie. Okay, so you look at his main viewpoint characters.
Yeah.
You've got Giselle Dan Luther, Sandan Glockta, Logan Nine Fingers, Colonel West. These are four very different guys.
Wildly different. And that's why it works as a counterexample to lazy MWW. Giselle, for instance, he's incredibly vain, obsessed with status and beauty, really shallow.
Right.
So his internal description of a woman, it's going to be narcissistic. It's going to focus entirely on surface level stuff, on her appearance matching his standards.
Makes sense. And Glockta, he's the opposite.
Totally. He's this broken, cynical, tortured ex-military hero turned torturer. His view of a woman is likely to be detached, maybe calculating. He's looking for utility or maybe vulnerabilities he can exploit. He's not thinking about boob.
Definitely not. So the author is using their specific minds, their flaws, their ego, their cynicism to shape how they observe and describe women.
Yeah. If Abercrombie made all his characters think like women, then yeah, we'd have a clear MWW.
He doesn't.
No. Because the descriptions feel tailored to the specific, flawed internal perspective of that character, it comes across as successful characterization, not authorial.
Okay, so the rule of thumb for the listener then. Don't just react to one sentence or one description.
Avoid the knee-jerk react. The critique is much stronger, much fairer, if it's based on seeing a consistent pattern of behavior across an author's work or even just across a whole book.
And we need criteria for that fair critique. What should we ask ourselves?
I think two main questions. First, whose POV are we in right now? And does this description actually serve that specific character?
Okay, POV check first. What's it?
Second, is this description doing any work story? Is it necessary for the narrative? Does it add depth, move the plot, reveal character? Or does it just feel like the author indulged themselves?
Like the author just wanted to pause the story to describe this character's body for their own enjoyment.
Yeah, basically. Does it feel like authorial intrusion versus organic character thought or plot necessity? That's the...
All right, we've established MWW. It's visible, it's defined, it has this theoretical history with the male gaze. Now let's pivot. Let's talk about the other side.
Yeah.
Women writing men, or WWM.
And the first thing you notice is just the silence, comparatively.
It's striking, isn't it? The sheer difference in the volume of discussion is huge.
Massive. I mean, that WWM subreddit we mentioned, the one that catalogs examples, it was created 2 full years after the MWW one.
Really? 2 years later?
Yeah. And the sense is it was created largely as a direct reaction to the MWW discussion gaining steam. It didn't seem to bubble up organically from this huge pre-existing wellspring of complaint like MWW.
Interesting. So it felt more responsive than originating its own momentum.
That's the case, yeah.
And just like the discussion volume is different, the theoretical tools don't map neatly either, do they? People sometimes try to use the term female gaze as the opposite of male gaze, but that's not right.
Oh, that's a really persistent point of confusion. It's important to stress this. In established feminist critique, the term female gaze does not mean women looking at men.
Okay. Definitely not the simple inverse.
Not at all. It has a completely different meaning, a different function.
So how is the established female gaze actually defined in criticism?
It's generally used as a critical term to describe how women view other women in media.
Ah, women looking at women.
Yes. And typically it implies portrayals where those female characters have agency. They have depth. They're seen as subjects, not just objects defined by their looks or the relationship to men.
So it's about female subjectivity, female empowerment within the narrative frame.
Exactly. It's focused on validating the female experience and perspective between women, not on how women critique or view male. The two terms, male gaze and female gaze, they just don't function as direct opposites or equivalent.
Got it. Okay, so no easy theoretical counterpoint.
Yeah.
Which maybe brings us to the inevitable deflection tactic, the counter argument you always hear when MWW gets brought up.
Ah, yes, the classic. Well, what about women writing men? Have you seen the romance genre?
Right. The immediate jump to romance novels. Our sources looked into this defense, right? Who tends to use it, and what's the underlying motive?
Yeah, the analysis suggests it's often used as a defense mechanism, and ironically, it's frequently deployed by people who don't actually read romance novels themselves.
Seriously, they use it without reading.
Often, yes. They're using a stereotype, right? The perceived idea that romance full of bad, superficial writing, especially of men, they use that stereotype as a shield.
A shield against what?
Against having to engage with maybe uncomfortable but good faith criticism about MWW in a book or by an author they actually like and respect.
Ah, so it's a deflection. You're criticizing my favorite SFFF author for MWW. Well, romance is bad too, so your criticism doesn't count.
That's basically the logic, yeah. They try to equate potential flaws in a highly respected genre, like SFFF or literary fiction, with the assumed flaws of a genre they already dismissed.
So they use the perceived poor quality of a genre they look down on anyway.
To neutralize the critique of a genre they value, it's a way to shut down the conversation about gendered writing failures altogether.
Okay, so it's often a deflection by non-readers of the genre, but that forces the real question. If we put aside that deflection and look at readers who do genuinely have issues with how women write men, what are they actually complaining about?
Right. So when the research team started digging for those genuine good faith critiques of WWM, not the deflection one, they had some initial expectations, right? Based on traditional gender roles and commentary, what you'd think men might complain about.
Okay. What were those like men being written as too weak or too emotional?
Yeah, exactly. The predictable guess was that men would object to male characters being portrayed as, incompetent, maybe overly sensitive, perhaps sort of feminized, written too much like some idealized woman's version of
the beta male critique or something like that.
Kinda, yeah. The expectation was really a sort of political complaint, maybe focused on perceived emasculation in the writing.
Okay, but the reality, that wasn't it at all, was it? This is where the narrative kind of takes a twist.
Completely different. This was really the surprising part of the find. The men who had genuine problems with poorly written male characters, WWM, what they actually complained about.
Whoa.
It mirrored the women's complaints about MWW almost point for point. No way. Really? Like what specifically?
The specific issues they raised were things like, 1, the oversexualization of men's bodies, especially when the descriptions felt anatomically unrealistic or just focused on like absurdly hypermasculine features. Think, abs, carved from granite over and over.
Okay, so unrealistic body focus, check. What else?
2, real annoyance with male characters who were just flat. No personality, no internal struggles, no real agency of their own.
It's just there.
Yeah. 3, characters who all felt the same, homogenous, often boiled down to just one basic type, which someone summarized perfectly as just brooding and hot.
Brooding and hot.
With very little else defining them, right? And 4th, critically, this feeling that the male character existed purely as a kind of self-insert blank for the female reader.
Like a fantasy fulfillment object.
Exactly. Functioning only to provide comfort, or maybe validation, or just gratification to the female protagonist not living his own life.
Wow. Okay, so this completely shifts the focus. The critique isn't political about masculinity or weakness.
No, it's a critique of craft. It's about bad writing.
Precisely. The problem isn't that the men are written as too feminine or whatever. The problem is that they're reduced to object, just like the complaint about MWW.
Reduced to object, lacking agency, existing for the other character. It's the same fundamental literary failure.
That's the essential structural. Bad writing is bad writing, and it takes the exact same form, often, regardless of the author's gender or the character.
It's a failure to give the character an inner life, conflict, personality beyond their plot function or their relationship to the protagonist.
Right. Whether that function is sexual gratification for a male gaze or maybe emotional support for a female protagonist, the moment they become just a tool.
They stop being a real character. They become a prop.
A prop, exactly. And our sources suggest this prop-like reduction happens when male authors write women badly, MWWM, and when female authors write men badly, WWM.
So the type of failure is similar.
Very similar. The difference, the huge difference, lies entirely in where these failures are most likely to occur, where they're most visible, and which ones get culturally validated as a serious problem.
Okay, so we've landed on the structural problems in bad MWW and bad WWM are actually quite similar. Both boil down to objectification and lack of agency.
Yeah, that seems to be the core literary issue.
So now we have to tackle the big one. Why? Why is the MWW discussion constant roar while WWM is barely a whisper in comparison?
Right. And to answer that, you really have to zoom out from just literary critique. You have to connect it to the broader sociological context.
This isn't just about books anymore.
No. This asymmetry, our sources argue, it's rooted in centuries of cultural bias. We need to bring in frameworks like the one offered by Caroline Criado Perez in her book, Invisible Women. You know, the one about data bias.
Invisible Women, right.
Yeah.
Data bias in a world designed for men. How does her thesis shed light on literary?
Well, it comes down to a really fundamental perception of whose experience counts normal or default. Perez argues that the male experience isn't just seen as one experience among many.
It's seen as.
It's been socially validated as the default, the universal.
Ah.
And the quote that really sums this up from her work is, the result of this male-dominated is that the male experience, the male perspective, has come to be seen as universal, while the female experience seen as well, niche.
Universal versus niche. That is a critical distinction. Okay, so how does that play out in book criticism?
Think about it. If the male experience is the universal default, then a story failing to portray men well might just get labeled bad writing overall, or maybe a failure of that specific genre. It's a general flaw.
Right, it's not seen as a specific failure about men, it's just a bad book.
Potentially, yeah. But if the female experience is already framed as neat, then a failure to write women well isn't just bad writing. It becomes a specific targeted failure, a failure of imagination regarding that group.
Okay, I see. And this universal versus niche idea, it connects directly to which genres get respect, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It connects to cultural validation. Think about the books often criticized for MWW. When women raise these issues, they're frequently talking about books that have massive cultural perspective.
Like what kinds of books?
You know, the must-read classics, the big award winners, the epic fantasy series sold as speaking to the universal human things taught in schools.
So they're criticizing failures happening in the perceived cultural center. Things that are supposed to be for everyone.
Exactly. These MWW critiques are seen as important, or at least get amplified, because they're aimed at supposedly universal art. Now contrast that with WWM.
Where do WWM critiques usually land?
Overwhelmingly, the genre cited is romance.
Which is not treated as universal art.
Not even close. Romance is historically ridiculed by the literary establishment, right? Often dismissed, not taken seriously by critics, and very explicitly viewed as a genre for
a niche product.
A niche product. So when someone criticizes WWM within Rome, it's incredibly easy for the wider culture to just shrug.
Well, it's just romance. What do you expect?
Exactly. The critique itself, along with the flawed writing it points out, gets labeled niche. Right alongside the genre it comes. The complaint is dismissed because the source is already.
So the respect level, or lack thereof, for the genre basically stifles the critique before it can even get going.
That disparity in respect is absolutely crucial, according to the analysis. If a beloved, critically acclaimed author fails women in a prestige genre like literary fiction or SFFF, it feels like a fundamental flaw in something important, something universal.
But if an author writes men poorly in a marginalized genre like romance,
critics and many readers just go, well, yeah, that's that genre. The conversation dies right there.
Which explains why people searching for WWM examples really want to find them in those high prestige genres.
Right. Because if the problem exists mainly in a niche, dismissed genre, it's easy to dismiss the entire phenomenon as niche too. Finding it in important books would give the WWM critique more weight, more universality. So to really test this idea, is bad WWM mostly confined to romance, or is it just less common? The researchers who were surveying readers put some pretty specific rules.
You needed to filter out the romance examples to see what was left right, to level the playing field, sort of.
Exactly. They had to force the conversation out of that niche space, pair it fairly with MWW, which often target male.
Okay, so what were the rules for the male readers providing examples?
They were pretty strict, actually. First, you had to have personally read the book, no hearsay. You had to experience the poor WWM yourself.
Fair enough.
Second, and the book could not be from the romance genre, and not even from romance-adjacent subgenres like, say, a lot of contemporary urban fantasy where the romance plot is really dominant.
Okay, so basically find examples in highly regarded literary fiction or SFFF or thrillers, genres seen as more universal.
That was the goal, yeah. Isolate poor WWM writing in those non-niche genres.
Yeah, what happened? Did they find heaps of examples?
Well, this was revealing. Out of hundreds of responses they gathered, men actually really struggled to come up with strong, highly regarded non-romance.
They struggled. So it wasn't easy to find them.
Not at all. Which strongly suggests, though obviously technically prove, that maybe significant WWM failures are less common in universal genres compared to how often MWW pops up there.
And what about the non-romance examples they did manage to find? Was there anything notable about those?
Yes, and this was another crucial distinction that often came from the respondents themselves as they thought about it more. Many of the examples they initially suggested, they ended up sort of dismissing themselves. They'd say, well, actually about it, the whole book.
So it wasn't specifically the male character.
Right. They realized the female characters were often just as flat, or the plot was weak, or the prose was bad. They correctly identified it as just general authorial incompetence, not a specific gendered fail.
Which is different from the MWW complaint, where often the argument is the male characters are great, the plot is great, but why are the women so terribly written?
Exact. MWW is often highlighted as the specific gender-targeted failure within an otherwise well-regarded or well-crafted work, whereas the WWM examples outside romance often seem to be part of a larger pattern of just not great writing, period.
Okay, that distinction is really important. MWW is a specific flaw versus WWM sometimes being part of overall weak writing.
There was one non-romance example that did come up quite a few times, actually.
Which one was that?
Gale Hawthorne.
Right.
From Suzanne Collins's Hunger.
From Hunger Games, really. He was cited off
8 separate times, according to the source material. We cited as a really compelling, high-profile example of a poorly written male character by a prominent female author in a hugely successful non-romance SF.
Wow, okay. Why Gale? What was the specific critique? What was the literary failure people saw in his character?
Well, one analysis from a male reader identified as really seemed to nail what he argued that Gale felt fundamental shape serve the plot, specifically Cat.
Not serving his own internal logic or character.
Exactly. And he felt Gale mirrored this wider pattern he saw where male characters, especially stories centered on women, get boiled down to just anger and action.
Anger and action is a shortcut for depth.
That was the argument. Like, when an author needs a male character to seem complex or driven, the easy way out is just make him angry or make him fight. He becomes a type, right?
The protector type, the avenger type, the threat type.
Yes, instead of a fully realized person. And he argued Gale got reduced to being Katniss's angry shadow, defined almost entirely by his rage and his willingness to violence. He wasn't really allowed those quiet vulnerabilities.
Quiet vulnerabilities. That's a great phrase.
Yeah.
So the idea is that just showing intense emotion like rage isn't the same as showing real depth.
Right, because if the intensity is always outward-facing, anger, action, protection, fighting the character can still feel simple. They lack that space for the messy internal conflict.
Like self-doubt, or wrestling with responsibility in a nonviolent way, or dealing with depression.
Precise. And that lack of quiet vulnerability, that inability to really grapple internally with pain or responsibility or sadness without just lashing out. That's what distinguishes a truly deep character, arguably.
Okay, so Gale as the angry action plot device. Is there a counterexample, a male character praised for having that depth?
Yeah, the analysis contrasted Gale with a character like Kaladin Stormbless from Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive, also huge SFFF, obviously.
Yeah, big name in fantasy.
And he's often praised specifically because he wrestles constantly and internally with things like his own pain, his sense of overwhelming responsibility, his cycles of depression.
So he's allowed to be vulnerable, allowed to struggle inwardly.
Yes, and that allows him to grow in complex ways without being defined solely by his anger or his protector role, even though he does protect and get angry sometimes. It's the internal struggle that gives him depth beyond.
Okay, so we've covered the similar structures of bad writing, the sociological reasons for the discussion imbalance, the genre issues, and even a specific literary example like Gale versus Calais. What about final theory? Any ideas why women might, on average, have an edge in writing convincing male characters, even if WWM exists?
There's one compelling theory that came up. Let's call it the osmosis.
Osmosis, how does that work?
It suggests that women might have kind of inherent advantage just through cultural exposure because our media landscape, our history, our cultural narratives are so male-centric.
Right, the universal male perspective we talked.
Exactly. The idea is that women, basically from childhood, have been constantly consuming stories, media, and cultural products centered on the male. They've been sort of passively studying and seeing how male internal life is portrayed just by living it.
So if 90% of the movies, the big prestige TV shows, the best-selling SFFF, the video games, if they're primarily told through a male lens,
then women writers, just through sheer lifelong cultural osmosis, might have absorbed enough of that perspective to render male characters pretty convincingly, even if it's not perfect. They've had more source material to unconsciously draw from.
Okay, I can see that. And the flip side?
The flip side is that male writers may have had significantly less exposure to genuinely female-centric narratives, stories that explore the complex inner lives of women outside of just being love interests or mothers.
Less exposure to the niche perspective.
Right. And that lack of lifelong ambient exposure could, theoretically, lead to a poorer, less nuanced understanding when they try to write female internal experience, potentially resulting in more frequent MW.
That's a really interesting, if difficult to prove, theory, the osmosis theory.
It is. Now, obviously, we have to slap a big caveat on all of this.
Okay, what's the caveat?
This entire conversation, both MWW and WWM, it relies heavily on broad generalizations, right? And specifically stereotypes of the straight, cisgender, male and female experience. That's mostly the data pool we're drawing from in these discussions.
True. We're talking trends, averages, common patterns.
Exact. And we absolutely cannot let those general trends invalidate individual experiences or erase the diversity within genders.
Right. Averages aren't destiny for individuals.
Absolutely not. I think Richard V. Reeves in his book of Boys and Men makes this point really well regarding gender difference in general. He says something like, average differences between groups should not influence how we view individuals.
Okay.
Even if on average women are wired to be a little more nurturing, it does not mean that my son cannot be an excellent, caring, and empathetic teacher.
That's a great quote. So applying it here, even if the general trend suggests WWM is less prevalent or less criticized in universal genre,
that trend cannot and should not be used to dismiss your specific, individual, genuine negative experience reading a particular book by a female author where the men felt flat or objectified. Your experience is valid regardless of the average.
And this connects back to the listener, right? Yeah. This is why that defense, well, maybe the genre just isn't for you, feels so dismissive and frustrating.
Exactly. If you've loved SFF your whole life, you're a dedicated fan, and you keep running into a really shallow MW that pulls you out.
The answer can't just be stop reading the genre you love.
No. That response completely invalidates your individual experience as a reader within that genre, brushing it off because of a perceived demographic norm. It ignores the problem.
Okay, so wrapping up, why does all this matter? Why spend time doing this deep dive into MWW versus WW? If authors are selling millions, does it really matter if some characters are maybe written poorly based on gender?
Well, I think it matters profoundly if an author claims to be writing universally, if they aspire to that level of prestige and broad human insight.
If you want universal acclaim, you need universal skill and characterization.
You'd think so, right? It matters if an author cares about actually writing half of their potential readership, half of humanity, well, and for us as readers and enjoyers of stories.
Yeah.
It just encourages critical thinking. It encourages us to really examine the things we love. Analyzing flaws in a favorite book or series doesn't have to diminish the joy it brings. It can actually deepen our appreciation for the craft when it is done well. For all characters. #tag attribute.
Okay, so I think our deep dive has brought us to a pretty clear conclusion. Women writing men, WWM, it definitely exists.
Rah.
And the literary failures, flat characters, the sexualization, the objectification, they often look structurally very similar to men writing women, MWW.
Yeah, the core writing problems seem
But that huge difference in how we talk about the volume of the conversation, that seems deeply rooted in how our society tends to value the male perspective as the universal default.
While female perspective is often relegated to being niche.
And that imbalance, that structural bias, it basically determines which critique gets taken seriously, gets amplified culturally, and which one often gets dismissed as, genre-specific whining or just isn't discussed much at all.
But at the end of the day, good writing is good writing. That's the universal. Authors who are skilled at creating deep, believable characters, they can usually do it regardless of the character's gender identity. The failure seems more linked to bias or lack of perspective than inherent.
Right. So we want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought that came up during the research for this. It's a question we don't really have the answer to. If WWM was less of a problem in the romance genre, let's say, hypothetically, that romance consistently featured male characters written with the same depth, the same internal complexity, the same quiet vulnerabilities as, say, a Kaladin.
Okay.
Would more men read romance? If the quality of the male character writing was consistently hitting those notes of deep internal struggle, would that actually broaden the appeal of the entire genre?
Could it challenge that historical niche status, maybe even increase its cultural and, let's be honest, economic respect?
Yeah. What are the ripple effects of writing quality, specifically across gender lines, on how we perceive and value entire genres?
That's definitely some food for thought.
Something to mull over next time you're picking up a book.
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.
We'll see you next time.